this small Pampas here is an example of a very tiny version of what we're going to be looking at in a minute, which is a much larger one. But from small beginnings, it's still, I suppose, a year or two. Well, no, actually, it's probably maybe 2 to 3 years old, possibly. Certainly in a shady site, it's actually grown a bit slower than it would out in the sun. But it is going to be as much a problem as many of the Pampas around. So simple. When it's prepped properly, I've cut it down really tight. Yeah. One single application of dry glyphosate. I've cleared all around it because it's surrounded by moth as well, which is another issue as well. By doing this integrated control, we will actually have this area here ready for some nice regen very soon. This Pampas I'm standing next to is a little bit older than the one we've just seen. Still in its infancy as far as size is concerned of what it's capable of doing. But it will reach for the stars. I've given it a trim about 10 days ago, and you can see where the cut mark is, and already it's actually reaching. Again, my prep at the moment is actually I will come back up. So I've topped it once. That's so damn dangerous the first time because of all the cutting. Let's take the top off, and then I take it down another lot. It'll come off down about this level here. In fact, I've started just down to here. There's an awful lot of vegetation. It doesn't need to be here. The great thing about doing that is that it means you use as little herbicide as possible for maximum effect. This dry glyphosate is so effective that handled properly, it will just need one small application, and I can guarantee that this thing will be dead. I've done enough of them and I'm absolutely certain of that. The lovely thing about using dry gly in wetland is it doesn't travel as well, so if it's properly applied according to manufacturer's instructions, it will do no harm to any adjacent plant. Now just yesterday, this enormous, well was once an enormous Pampas, was covered in seed heads. It was a major threat to this hidden wetland that we've just discovered. I spent the best part of a morning and felt as though I'd been dragged through a cheese grater doing it, but I managed to actually get on top of the whole, literally I had to climb on top of this massive mountain. The actual plant is on this side, and the rubbish that I took off it is actually on this side here. I've used the edge of the Pampas to stash the rubbish adjacent so we don't create a new weed footprint. So I'm exploiting the fact that it's here at the moment. What I've done is I've actually topped it. First of all, I've removed all the seed heads off it. I've reduced down a fair bulk of it. We're prepping all the Pampas in this area, which is a long and rather painful experience at the moment, so that we can come back in spring when it's a bit drier, because the dry glyphosate works better in dry periods than it does at the moment. So I will GPX all these massive Pampas. There are a number of them, even bigger than this actually, so that when it comes time to actually come and nail these rat bags with that stuff, we'll be ready to go through with our bucket and get them all in one fell swoop. This is the back end of that large Pampas that I tackled yesterday, and all that we're looking at on this side is actually the rubbish that came off it, including a bit of Mexican devil which I've been pulling out adjacent to it as well. It was just such a huge heap. It was actually quite a struggle climbing up and over it, but my goodness, actually cutting down those last pieces on there was hugely satisfying. Actually great view from there as well. You look straight out at the shell spit. So it was, in the end of the day, it was a great experience. What we're looking at here is a big pile of Mexican devil. Actually, it's a small pile. There's a much bigger pile somewhere else. I'm in the process of moving it at the moment. One of the best byproducts, or one of the wonderful dividends of our major moth plant contract at the moment in this hidden wetland, is actually the control of the secondary species, the secondary pest plant species in here at the moment, which are incredibly aggressive and bullying. Interestingly, climbing asparagus isn't one of them. And it just shows how in a site-specific situation you just have different issues, different problems and different approaches. So Mexican devil is one. It's a bully on the one hand, but it's actually very easy to remove with manual removal, and I'm taking them right off the site so they can't root up again. And we're reclaiming an awful lot of airspace as a consequence, which will allow some of these more delicate ground cover characters to recolonize the site again, which of course is ground cover and prevents ongoing moth infestations in the future. And then the second thing is we're adjacent to another Pampas just here. Medium-sized one. It's been topped, it's ready, it's prepped, it's nice and clean around the base, ready to be treated with glyphosate in spring, and we are using it also as a little bit of virtue signaling here. Here's some monster moth cord, slightly smaller ones, but look at the size of them, all the same, massive the potential of the pods that these guys have already produced and would continue if we hadn't controlled them. Having them coiled off the ground means they won't root up again. Beautifully coiled, might I say, thank you, Richard. The nautical approach applied in the conservation situation just brings even further pleasure to our work here. And I'm using the Pampas here at head height because it's great advertising. It's a great way of actually being able to use, put these in a safe place where they'll be here all winter. We'll be able to find them. I'll bring people here who've never seen moth plants like this before and just hold them up and say, do you know what this is? Now on my right, I've got the very beginnings of the Pampas control that we actually did in this hidden wetland about 2 years ago actually. Long before that we knew we'd actually have some moth money to bring in here and actually control this area properly. There were a number of these Pampas, well they were Pampas, believe me, they were very scratchy. Right on a bait line, we're standing on a bait line at the moment, and they were a hazard for our volunteers, so as a consequence I came in 2 years ago and gave them a jolly good haircut, and they had a good dollop of dry glyphosate granules. And this one that I've got my hand on at the moment is a great example because it's actually slowly absorbing back into the landscape. The carex is starting to grow through it. We're now using the footprint that still exists here as a base for a new rubbish pile. We've had rubbish from our last moth endeavour, and in fact right on the top of it, the green vegetation at the moment are young moth seedlings that we've been pulling out by hand adjacent to this Pampas. I'm standing actually in the middle of a major moth infestation zone. Behind me is a large karamu that actually has shed obviously an enormous amount of pod and seed in the past, and there's rather a carpet of it. So the fact that we've already ahead as far as this Pampas is concerned is going to make our moth control here a heck of a lot easier. And now finally we're in front of another huge, well actually it is really huge, Pampas. I've been saving this one so that we could actually film the process, at least the start of it, of actually where you start, which is kind of anywhere and nowhere. Begin at the beginning and just know that if you just keep at it, you'll eventually get to the end of it. Even if it seems daunting at the time, it's still a finite thing. Flax cutter, absolutely essential. This has done a hell of a lot of work and it's absolutely brilliant with it. Gloves, absolutely essential. Eye protection, absolutely essential. Covered, all this, I mean, you still end up being quite scratched by it, but it's impossible without all this gear. But with the gear, it actually is doable. Now the first thing that I'm going to use if I was starting here is that you'd think you'd want to actually get at the seed head straight away. You can't possibly because you've got a lot of peripheral vegetation. So at the moment I'm just going to take some of these side shoots away, and sometime in the next few days when I've got enough stamina I'll come back and attend to the rest of it. The fascinating area we're standing in of Pampas that we discovered when we were setting up the jungle boxes for the hidden wetland is a really big, sort of expansive population of Pampas, but there was something very, very peculiar about it. We came at it from the far side along the plant community boundary between saline and fresh water, and noticed that someone did. My first thought was, gosh, someone's been in here controlling them. I think, well, that's impossible because no one has been in here, let alone doing anything like that. And then it occurred to me, of course, it's the consequence of saline incursion, and you can see some basins in the middle of this conglomeration of Pampas where nothing is growing at the moment, and you can see that at high tide some water's been in the past, but all around it, where that salt concentration is less, the Pampas behaves accordingly. So we go from areas of still incredible vigour right down to plants that have grown in the past and then actually are barely surviving there. In fact, the one behind me at the moment is almost dead. It's got no top because I've taken a little bit off, but it was virtually dead. And then the ones in the middle actually had growth that was weakish. It was there. The shade, of course, is actually knocking its growth to a certain extent, but the salt is definitely working its charm on it. And then there are the pampas of various degrees of life and death looking out to the shells. In fact, I can see the shell spit from here in the water, actually out towards the twiggy rush of the Balmere. And behind me is the fresh water wetland, which is vigorous. In fact, to our right are some very big pampas. In fact, it's the other side of that huge clump that I was and started to attend to earlier. It's a massive colony. And so just adjacent, you can see where the fresh water comes to, because next door to this massive clump, they're all struggling. It's an amazing, it's an ecotone. It's an amazing delineation where the plant communities are telling you where one water type finishes and another water type starts, and it's all about the salt. Lots of seed heads in there. There's an awful lot of young pampas still to come, and if I don't get those seed heads down soon. But we'll nail them. We'll get them.